necessarily bring about peace. We had to consciously and deliberately engage in reconciliation and peace in order to really have a harmonized country. My next area really that I want to focus on is about women's insecurity in the North and the East. I think there are very clear characteristics with any war in the world, right? Whether if you think about World War II, with Japan having comfort women from Korea, if you're looking at Bosnia-Herzegovina to Argentina, and currently Iraq, they have the same characteristics. You end up having trafficked women. For the first time, Iraq is seeing women being trafficked, right? And there's comfort women, which is forced prostitutions. And when there are military bases, that is what happens. And Sri Lanka actually right now is no exception to that. Initially, there was a heavy, although the reporting was low, there was a heavy threat of sexual violence for women who were in the camps, which meant that it was within the camps. When they were showering, they were threatened. When they went to the restroom, they were threatened. In health camps, they were threatened. Going back and forth to school, they were threatened, right? Right now, the direct sexual assault on women, the reporting is much less, okay? But there's an increase in forced prostitution, right? And there's an increase in the number of comfort women. And these are mainly around the military bases. And the government has said that the military bunkers that they had for the, during the war is actually being demolished. Technically, that is true, okay? However, they are being consolidated, right? So the temporary bunkers are broken down, but right now there are 24 major military bases in the North and the East. 80% of the tunnel households in the North and the East are currently headed by women. Conditions in these houses are pretty bad. As I told you earlier, doors really don't work. And in 2009, I was in Vavuniya and had access. Actually, a police officer took me, or the head of the police in Vavuniya took me to a children's home. It is called Sri Lanka, and it was developed and provided by the president's wife, the first lady. Right? This particular children's home, which is all girls, right, traumatized and were brought, no parents, right, did not have a door. And the Cyrilia home is guarded by a military personnel. Now, this person might be absolutely nice and might never step in. But you have to think about the trauma that the people inside and the children are having when their parents were killed by the people who are now guarding them. Right? And because they did not have a door, actually I was taken in because they wanted money to have a door and a kitchen. Right? Police was able to go in and out of this place. And that was considered normal at that time. And I also want to point out that while the children's home had access, or adults had access who were not related to the children to these homes, the probation officer that was from the south, from Valley Cadet, who was positioned in Vavuniya, was extraordinary and made sure that the children are actually not taken out of the area. Women are trafficked from the North and the East to brothels. They are trafficked, of course, by saying that they are offered jobs. And they are taken into brothels, and there was not too long ago, actually I think it was about 6 weeks ago, that the police raided and got some of the women released. Military men continue to expose themselves and threaten women in all areas in the North and the East, except in Jaffa. Okay. This is a classic example. When vehicles and pedestrians are stopped by the military officials, they request cell phone numbers of the women. If they don't provide the numbers, they are threatened of sexual assault. If they do provide the numbers, then they receive calls in the night requesting for sexual favors. Right? And this is ongoing in Sri Lanka right now. just after the war ended, as I said, that there were infants that were taken into orphanages in the South, and that has been stopped, as far as we know. The fact that women must rely on the military for everyday needs, it's not only putting them at greater risk of gender-based violence, but it also prevents from building capacity within the community for a just society. In concluding, I want to really go back to accountability that Jim brought up, right? And I want to read a paragraph that was written by K.P. Jayawardena of Sri Lanka for the Asian Human Rights Commission that's based in Hong Kong. This accountability process cannot be limited to truth-telling and reconciliation, but it must be definitively linked to the restoration of integrity in regard to Sri Lanka's justice institutions. One cannot have reconciliation in a vacuum, and it's quite absurd to even think of true healing of communities and societies when the concept of law and justice has lost all value, and the precedent is above the law. What can devolution mean when the entire concept of a constitution has lost all meaning? How can citizens of the North and the East be served with justice according to the law when basic law and order is lost in all parts of the country? I think for Sri Lanka, regardless of who you are, there's a sense of accountability and an urgency for accountability that we are requesting. Now, it is, as a Sri Lankan for me, up to us to figure out whether asking for justice and accountability comes from a place of anger or in hatred, or whether it comes from a place of empathy and compassion. I'm not interested in empathy and compassion for the sake of empathy and compassion. I think the question here is, if we engage for accountability of Sri Lanka, especially from the Sri Lankan community, right, with vengeance and justice, we'll be limiting ourselves. If we engage in accountability and justice from the Sri Lankan community with empathy and compassion, it is not about the government. It is really the rising of the inherent dignity of all people, especially the ethnic minority of the Tamils. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of our speakers, who are now going to have a seat so that we can begin our screening. Again, for any of you who are sitting in the way back, we do have some seats up front if you'd like a closer seat, and people who are raising their hands are indicating we have some seats next to them as well. It's really no problem if you come up here.
I'm going to start playing and to make a final check on the sound level, and then we'll start again.
This film contains very disturbing images depicting death, injury, execution, and evidence of sexual abuse and murder. Much of it filmed on mobile phones or small cameras. The images come from Sri Lanka's bloody civil war, which ended 2 years ago with the deaths of as many as 14,000 people